what you think helped you form this connection to your Lebanese heritage. Was it stories from your family, the linguistic component, cultural factors like food or music, some combination?
Sure, I think it was all of those things. I would say the biggest of them all was probably the language. The fact that I was raised in around my extended family, who was all Lebanese, and we were raised speaking Lebanese Arabic as our first language, and also the fact that yes, the food. I mean, I was raised very much in a Lebanese household, and so what made me cling to that identity once I stepped out of my household was when I realized that, okay, I'm a little bit different than everybody else that's in my school, all of my friends and all of my peers, and I think that sort of, you can either go two ways with that. Some kids want to go towards one extreme and become extremely, lose their identity completely, lose their culture so that way they can blend in as well as possible and assimilate into the American life. But I found it a little bit difficult to do that, and so I felt the need to kind of get more in touch with my culture. There were stories, I mean, I think both my parents, especially my dad though, are very proud of being Lebanese, and they care very much about their country. And just sometimes we would hear little stories, like we'd be outside playing soccer, and then my dad would say, in Lebanon there's no grass to play soccer. You can only play on rocks because it's all mountains, and so everybody has to plant their own grass if they want it. So just little things like that kind of give us an idea for what it's like over there. Also stories about how people used to ride donkeys around and things like that back in the day, as well as just my dad used to sing kind of patriotic songs about Lebanon, and he would sit us down on the couch or on his lap, and he'd make us sing with him.
And you've also grown up having dual citizenship.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that affected your identifying more closely with Lebanon, or did it affect the way that you understood national identity and belonging in that sense?
Yeah, I think it did. I think the question of national identity is very interesting. Where do you belong and why do you belong there? In terms of Lebanon, genetically, in terms of my blood, that is where my family's from. However, I was born and raised in the United States, and I have every right to feel nationally American. But for me, I think a lot of the reason that I feel Lebanese is because of my blood, is because of, I know that's what's inside of me. I know that's where my family comes from. I know my family doesn't have a history in this country. And that's a little bit difficult. I think also growing up it was a little bit difficult when you're in school and you're learning about how the British came to the United States, followed by and fought for independence. The Pilgrims fought for independence. You learn about all that in elementary school, and it's a little bit hard to relate to that when my parents just came here 20 years ago. So obviously that wasn't my family that was doing any of that.
When you were growing up, in school, did you feel that you experienced discrimination when you were, perhaps when you were still learning English?
New York, yeah, there wasn't. I didn't even realize I was any different than anyone else until I actually moved down to the South. And the reason for that is because in the South, at the time, I moved here in 3rd grade, and you were either white, black, or Hispanic. That was it. And so obviously I fell into the category of Hispanic, and when I tried to tell people that I wasn't Hispanic, they had no idea what I was saying. But things got a little difficult when 9/11 hit, and the reason is that I'm sure many people here in the South just had no idea about anything about the Middle East for a long time. And as soon as 9/11 hit, the only thing they knew was Osama bin Laden, terrorism, and Al-Qaeda, and it just, I would have to be careful when I told people, oh, I'm Lebanese, and then they asked, where's Lebanon? And I would have to say, hey, it's a little iffy, so I didn't want to say directly in the Middle East, because then they have an automatic assumption, or they get fear, they become overcome with fear. So I would actually say, it's beneath Turkey, just to try to ease their minds a little bit. And the one time that I think from a teacher that I felt a little discriminated against was I was filling out a bubble sheet for my final exam. This was in the 4th grade, and I was I was filling out white, because technically Middle Easterners in the United States are classified as white, and that's what my mom had always told me. But my teacher came up and looked over my shoulder and noticed that I bubbled in white, and she stopped me and said, "Why are you bubbling in white?" And I told her, I'm white. My mom tells me I'm white. And she just looked at me in confusion, and then she told me, "No, you should bubble in other."
When you say you're Lebanese, what do you think are people's reaction? Do they know where
For,
Lebanon is?
I think the older that I've gotten, it's gotten a little bit better. But for a long time, actually, it may not even be necessarily just because I've gotten older. It may just be that time has gone by and people have gotten more educated about the Middle East period. Lebanon has come into the news more for good or for bad. But initially, when I would tell people I'm Lebanese, I would get reactions like, "Oh, isn't that in Africa?" Thinking about Libya. Sometimes I would get things like, "Isn't that near Russia?" I don't know, thinking about maybe, who knows? I have no idea. So there are a lot of times people do not know where Lebanon is, not even roughly. And it may just be because of the way that I look that it's hard to place. But I think, more recently, definitely the older I've gotten, I say Lebanon, and they know, it's in the Middle East. Maybe not necessarily exactly where, but they know the general area.
I mean, you said you felt a big shift in school, like post 9/11. Do you think that did your family also feel that way within the community, or?
I think so. I think my dad was also a little bit more aware when he would try to, we'd be a little bit more hesitant to tell strangers right away that we're Lebanese, just because of the stigma that did exist. I think maybe with our friends, it started to get perhaps a little weird, especially with the friends that weren't Lebanese. After all that started to happen, I think some of them started to feel a little awkward around a Lebanese family. But yeah, I can't say that I would say that more of the shift was I experienced it personally as opposed to my family in general.
And you were saying also about when you moved to Greensboro, about how there was basically black, white, and Hispanic. But we talked last time about how there's this older Middle Eastern population. Had that just really been absorbed into white?
Basically.
Was that okay?
So with that first influx of migrants from Lebanon, by that time, we're talking 2000s already. So by that time, they were already it would have had the people that were currently living in Greensboro at the time. It would have been their grandfathers that came from Lebanon, and so therefore many of them never told people they were Lebanese. They would have last names, and last names that were Lebanese but Americanized, and no one would ever ask them what your last name is, because they blended in so well, and they were basically detached from their culture, except for the fact that they knew that their grandma made kibbeh once upon a time. So
when you talk about, like, we've had this discussion and we talked about a little bit in the first interview, that you choose to identify as Lebanese and not to use the term Arab, and I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit.
Sure. I think the reason I choose to say that I'm Lebanese is because I believe that the word Arab is a very generic blanket term that is used to cover or to apply to several groups of people, several different ethnicities, different religions, people who speak different languages, and call them all Arab. And I believe this term is appropriate at times. I think historically the term came about for appropriate reasons. However, I believe that the Western implication of the term, meaning that a lot of times when the West is talking about the Middle East, they do refer to all Middle Easterners as Arabs. They do refer to as everybody as Arabic speakers, and I think this is just a very ignorant statement. And honestly, I compare it very much to saying that everybody who is in Europe are all Latin, and nobody would identify as Latin. Obviously, if you were to go to somebody in France, they would say, "No, I'm French, not Latin," and it's the same sort of a thing. So I don't think that, I don't believe that ethnically I am of Arab descent, because the Arabs are a specific group of people. However, I do believe myself to be a part of the Arab culture. And so the way that works is, when Lebanese people talk about themselves, they refer, within their own community, they refer to their language as Arabic for the sake of simplicity. And they also, when they talk about each other, they don't necessarily refer to each other as Arabs. They refer to each other as Lebanese. But when they refer to other people in the Middle East, they refer to them also as their nationalities. They don't generalize and say those Arabs. And I think that's the difference between the way the Westerners use it and the Middle Easterners use it. It's very much in the Middle East, the word is used appropriately when necessary, and people do maintain their identity. But in the West, it's very much, it doesn't matter what your nationality is, it doesn't matter, you're all the same, you're all Arab, and I think that's the reason I don't like the term. I just think it's a shame to take away the differences that exist between us all. Obviously, you go from Morocco to Algeria to Egypt to Lebanon to Syria, there are differences. Some of them are huge differences, some of them are small differences, but they definitely exist. Obvious ones in the cuisine, obvious ones in the dance, obvious ones in the dress, obvious ones in religion and language. So it's just, there's no way that you can apply a blanket term to all of these people. But however, on the flip side, a lot of the advocates of the use of the word Arab say that it's important in order to unite the people of this region, and I do believe that that's necessary. Therefore, I do believe that I can identify as part of a larger Arabic culture. But I always want to make sure that people understand that within that Arabic culture, we're not all homogenous.
In terms of having politics and having dual citizenship, or having immigrated, did your family maintain political involvement? But just in terms of voting, I don't know if they allow absentee voting.
Lebanon, in the past, I don't think has allowed absentee voting, but now I think they're in the process of opening up voting to all Lebanese citizens outside of the United States in an effort to try to rein in the diaspora. So I don't know if that's in effect yet, but it will be soon. So my parents actually haven't voted in Lebanon for several years. There have been times when my grandma has gone back to Lebanon specifically to vote. And I know some Lebanese people do that, but I would say that it's pretty safe to assume that most Lebanese diaspora outside of Lebanon are so disgusted with the politics there that they feel no need to want to go back and vote, because you're voting for the lesser of two evils, and they would rather just not partake in that. So,
do you think being at the university has been conducive to that quest? Have you found in taking Arabic classes or being involved with the department? Or
I think in high school it was harder for me to identify publicly as Lebanese, because there was nothing for me to cling to, there was nothing for me to associate myself with. Just all I could do was say, hey, I'm Lebanese, and then that's it. No one knew anything about it. There's no way for me to do anything with that. And coming to UNC, it was a lot easier. I could say that I was Lebanese. There's obviously a huge community at Chapel Hill that admires the Middle East, studies the Middle East, wishes they were Middle Eastern, all that. And so it definitely, as well as the fact that there are several Lebanese people that go to the school, and so that did create a sense of community for me, and in a way it kind of allowed me to be more proud of my identity. I think that's really nice, because I feel like I've been on a journey for the past few years trying to figure out exactly what it means to be Lebanese American, how much am I of each one, and what each half of that identity really means to me.